Once again, good afternoon on behalf of the Office of the Prime Minister for a briefing update on two issues, currently on humanitarian operations that are being undertaken and rebuilding efforts within the Tigray region, as well as legal related issues in the Tigray region. And on the elections, I have here with me the Attorney General, Dr. Gedion Timothewos, who would also be providing you with a briefing current situation update. To begin, I will start with the preliminary statement and provide you with the details. On Tigray, the government of Ethiopia's law enforcement mission in the Tigray region, which commenced in November 2020, has notably garnered global attention. The suffering of Ethiopians who are victims of a situation that is not of their choosing is a source of pain for all Ethiopians and for the government. Over the course of the past months, there have been various efforts on the part of the government to assuage the pain and suffering of its own citizens in the region. While these efforts may have been marred by various challenges given the complex nature of any armed engagement, these efforts nevertheless have been underway and centered on enabling the return of normalcy for our people within the Tigray region. The aspirations of this administration to enable a life of dignity for its citizens over the course of the past 3 years has often been hijacked by agents of instability and their accomplices. The situation in Tigray is no different. A conflict provoked by a belligerent and now outlawed criminal enterprise has initiated endless suffering for the people of the region in whose name it continues to trade. While revisiting the incidents of November 4, 2020 that precipitated a federal government intervention may be viewed as a repetition, the global community has failed to come to terms with a number of glaringly apparent facts, which I would like to draw your attention to once again. Number one, the criminal enterprise's 3-decade abuse of power, state capture, bottomless corruption, and gross human rights violations committed against the nations and nationalities of the country, particularly ethnic Somalis, Amharas, Oromos, Anwaks, and many other groups without any external intervention. Number two, the disdain shown by the criminal enterprise towards numerous attempts to dialogue initiated by the federal government and many other independent actors, which have all been thwarted over the past 3 years. Number three, the warmongering narrative and overt belligerence exhibited by the criminal enterprise for several months preceding their attacks on the northern command of the Ethiopian National Defense Force. War is our traditional dance has been a commonly stated theme of the terrorist group. Number four, the public confession of a preemptive attack on the North Command of the National Defense Force by a regional irregular force which constitutes an act of war on the state and people of Ethiopia, which warranted a response. Number five, the continued belligerence of fragments of the criminal enterprise, despite several calls by the federal government over the past months for them to surrender peacefully and lay down their arms with a guarantee of amnesty and support to return to life. Number six, the continued attacks on humanitarian convoys by fragments of the criminal enterprise that are blocking assistance meant for the very people in whose name they are trading. Number seven, the misguided, well-financed, and lobby firm-supported disinformation campaigns and false narratives lodged by sympathizers of the criminal enterprise outside of Ethiopia. Number eight, the utilization of looted national wealth illegally siphoned off into offshore accounts being used to finance disinformation campaigns and destabilizing activities, while the people of Tigray in whose name they trade have yet to receive a drop of financial and humanitarian support from these communities abroad. Number nine, the establishment and active operation of a constitutionally mandated provisional administration whose members continue to be assassinated by the criminal enterprise for merely serving the people of Tigray under a new mandate. And finally, number 10, the recent designation of the TPLF as a terrorist organization by the House of People's Representatives in a process adhering to the constitutional process of the country. These 10 facts are often deliberately overlooked, omitted, and disregarded by various entities who may have another agenda that has less to do with the well-being of our people in the Tigray region, but rather with other vested interests. The concoction of figures and stories to push a particular global narrative does not serve the people of Tigray, in whose name fabrications are spun for fundraising, relevance, and other interests. Ethiopia is witnessing an orchestrated attack that is condescending in nature, often patronizing in tone, belligerent in approach, and destructive in outcome. It is disingenuous to hijack the suffering of ordinary citizens for other goals. Compassion, upholding human rights, maintaining rule of law are values and principles entrenched in our cultural fabric and heritage as Ethiopians. While perceptions of a people in siloed ethnic identities of Amhara, Tigray, Oromo, Somali, etc. is prevalent, Ethiopians know and understand that their roots run deep and are intertwined long before identity was institutionalized. Therefore, save for a few conflict entrepreneurs that continuously press on lines of divisions, Ethiopians have and know how to live in harmony with each other. The need to support our people in the Tigray region recover from the current suffering is a primary responsibility of the government of Ethiopia, which it takes very seriously and is undertaking within the means available to it. Ethiopia has also shown readiness and an open will to positively and constructively engage with all partners, local and international. However, demonizing a sitting prime minister and chastising the government for reversing state collapse triggered by a criminal enterprise, instead of extending further support and reinforcement to rehabilitate the Tigray region, is unproductive and not constructive. The government of Ethiopia, led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, knows its duties and commitments to its own people, to international norms and standards, and continues to take measures in addressing the multifaceted needs of more than 100 million people throughout the country. The government categorically rejects accusations of decimation of a people as a policy. Such is not the heartbeat of the administration. The following figures and data compiled from key government stakeholders will provide an insight into the breadth of work being undertaken by the government in the Tigray region, but which does not seem to be making headlines. So I'll start with the rule of operations. With regards to what's being undertaken in that regard, counterinsurgency operations by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces are now concentrated only in 2 areas where the outlawed operatives are active, and this phase is expected to soon be finalized. The outlawed group is occasionally undertaking attacks outside of these areas to give the impression of control and that the region is completely unstable. However, as I mentioned, the operations currently are focused on 2 primary areas to apprehend these illegal components and terrorizing elements. On humanitarian assistance, delivery of food and non-food items for 4.5 million beneficiaries in the first round, with a reported reach of 4.3 million beneficiaries in the second and third rounds, is noted and reported by the stakeholder that's responsible for this. Within the Tigray region, 93 waradas are currently, or districts, are currently being aided or provided aid, for which the federal government provides to 14 of the 93. Which means the remaining is being covered by partner organizations that are active in the area and providing humanitarian assistance. More than 166,000 metric tons of food, which costs 5.2 billion birr or 131 million USD, has been distributed thus far. The food distributed in the region for the first and second round was covered by both the government at 70% of contribution and partners at 30% of contribution. Currently, 6 operators, namely World Food Programme, World Vision, CARE, Relief Society of Tigray, Food for the Hungry, and the government of Ethiopia are providing this food assistance in the region. Out of the 93 districts, as mentioned, WFP, World Vision, CARE, Rest, and Food for the Hungry, or FH, cover 79 districts, And as I mentioned, the government of Ethiopia is covering 14% or 14 districts. This shows how the government of Ethiopia has been working closely with partners and creating a conducive environment for humanitarian actors to operate. With this continued provision of food assistance, the global claims of hunger being used as a weapon of war are baseless and politically motivated. More than 79,000 emergency shelter and non-food item kits, including 41 rub holes, which is estimated to be more than 638 million birr or 16 million USD, has been supplied to cover the needs of more than or close to 400,000 IDPs. However, there is a significant gap in non-food items, which partners are covering only at 30% of the total requirements. So this is one gap that needs to be sufficiently addressed in catering to the needs of people affected by the conflict. Emergency medicine, which is estimated to be which at an expense of 72.9 million birr, and 12 ambulances have been supplied to the region by the Ministry of Health to strengthen the basic health services and facilities which had been destructed. The Ministry of Health has been working to operationalize the health facilities in the region and availing emergency supplies for the hospitals and other institutions in the region. In addition, together with partners, more than 60 mobile health teams have been established to deliver health services. 2 UN agencies and 9 international NGOs, in collaboration with the region's health bureau, are providing mobile health services in different waradas. So again, the allegations that health services are completely destructed and not operational is a baseless accusation, because together with aid organizations and partners, these activities are being undertaken. With regards to water supply for internally displaced people, 120 water trucks have been continuously active and deployed to supply safe water to IDPs and communities, which cover more than 621,000 people in the region. The Ministry of Agriculture, considering that the planting season is also upon us, and ensuring that farmers are reintegrated back into their farming activities, the Ministry of Agriculture has allocated more than 10 million birr to strengthen the regional agriculture and natural resource bureaus. Per reports provided, a total of 537,728 quintals of fertilizers have been made available thus far and have been dispatched to warehouses within the region. 3,440 quintals of seeds have also been purchased and transported to the region, with partners allocating around birr 72 million for livestock restocking as well. In terms of education, the Ministry of Education has allocated 95 million birr to the reopening of schools. Ministry of Education has also dispatched 1 million face masks to the region and installing hand washing facilities in up to 58 schools to provide and to promote COVID-19 protocols with the coordination of the education clusters in the region. Refugees in the region have been also one of the key priorities of the government to maintain their safety and security, and for the continuous food and non-food supplies to be available. In refugee camps where access and issues related with safety and security are a concern, the government has also taken immediate action by relocating and maintaining basic humanitarian services within the new locations. To say a little bit with regards to coordination mechanisms that have been put in place between the federal government and partners. Currently, the government and its partners are working closely based on the agreement which was signed on November 29, 2020, which stipulate terms of agreement related to access, coordination, and humanitarian assistance. To boost safe, efficient, and effective delivery of humanitarian assistance, an emergency coordination center, ECC, has been established in Mekelle for some months now. And this ECC, or Emergency Coordination Center, is comprised of relevant line ministries, regional bureaus, UN agencies, bilaterals, and international NGOs. This ECC is mandated to address immediate food and non-food needs in best organized and coordinated manner. Similarly, there has been also structures that have been put in place to cascade the services that the ECC is providing in a 4-layer emergency coordination system at the regional, zonal, warada, and food distribution points. Just to reiterate, as part of this coordination mechanism and in efforts to align with partners and also hear their side of what needs to be fulfilled, a very useful dialogue platform was convened by the Deputy Prime Minister, in which higher federal and regional government heads met with representatives of the international community and humanitarian actors this morning to come to an understanding on facts on the ground where many partners and humanitarian actors, including the UN, the European Union, have acknowledged that progress has been made. On access for humanitarian agencies, because that seems to be a prevalent contention, particularly on social media spaces, where initially there was a case-by-case clearance procedure that had been put in place. For several months now, humanitarian aid providers have been permitted or have been granted a blanket approval process in order to better coordinate food and non-food item provisions across the region, which means that for any humanitarian actor to enter the Tigray region and provide assistance, all they are required to do at the minimum is initiate an email alert to the Ministry of Peace. More than 202 staff members of UN agencies, international NGOs, including over 80 journalists, have been provided access to the Tigray region to support, coordinate, and cover the emergency responses in the region, as well as other stories. Now, most parts of the region are accessible, contrary to continuous claims and allegations that this is not accessible. As I mentioned earlier, there's only 2 hotspots right now where there's active engagement to bring perpetrators of the terrorist cell, or to apprehend the terrorist cell. So with most parts of the region accessible, creating a conducive environment for the speedy delivery of food and non-food supplies to the needy in the region. In areas where safe movement of humanitarian cargoes are strained, military escort has been taken as a right measure by the federal government and a last resort to get access and those in need. And here I'd like to draw your attention that perhaps at a later point in time, the relevant authorities would give a much more detailed briefing on this. But just to indicate that the contestations around military escorts in some areas or military checkpoints have other reasons as well, because in some cases we have credible evidence indicating that some actors, under the guise of humanitarian assistance, have attempted to smuggle weapons beyond checkpoints in support of the terrorist cell. Another contentious area has been the granting of visa for humanitarian workers, but the visa extension procedure has already been put in place for partners who are stationed in the region. The extension is based on the work volume and duration in the region. Currently, visas are being granted for a period of 3 months with a possibility for extension, again, dependent on the volume of work. Communication materials is also another contentious area, or communication equipment. Currently, the Ministry of Peace has developed a guideline and circulated it to all partners to follow the direction that is indicated within the guideline. But the import and utilization of communication equipment has to be in adherence with the laws of the land. So demands to import military-like gadgets and equipment that go beyond the needs of humanitarian assistance cannot be accepted. No developed country would permit this. No developed country would permit the entry of equipment that are not for the stated purposes. Hence, Ethiopia need not be expected to go beyond what is legally set at a national level and the legal standard and guidelines that have been set. On recovery and rehabilitation, regarding recovery and peacebuilding intervention, the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Peace are closely working with international partners, the EU, World Bank, UNDP, in order to build back damaged and destroyed economic, social infrastructures within the region. A ministerial committee oversees all the support and has developed a plan to support regional bureaus on a regular basis by assigning experts. Peace-building initiatives have also been initiated by the Ministry of Peace, as well as strengthening of the security sector. The region's police force has taken over from the federal police. About 4,000 regional police officers participated in a refresher training and are now on duty. Community police and independent observers are organized in Mekelle city and vicinity and are working beside the police to enhance peace and security. Public service dialogue as part of the national dialogue initiatives that the Ministry of Peace has been undertaking throughout the country. More than 2,000 civil servants within the Tigray region have participated in peace dialogue organized by the ministry. National Youth Voluntary Community Service Program. As part of this program throughout the country, in the Tigray region specifically, 1,300 youth have been participating in a 1-month training with courses that include life skills, leadership, digital media smart use, civil and social virtues, consensus building and diversity, and peace building, and other activities as well. So this is just a snapshot of some of the milestones that have been undertaken by the federal government together with the regional government and international partners. This is just a preview to some extensive documentation that had been shared with the partners this morning as well, which in due time we would also make it available in detail. But while sharing these milestones, it is not to insinuate that challenges do not exist. It is not to gloss over the fact that there are challenges within the region. But leave alone in a situation where armed terrorists are active and external interests dominate, bringing stability to communities that are also affected by natural disasters in of itself is challenging. So just to mention some of the challenges, I had already intimated to one. First one is security concerns. There is sporadic tendencies for elements of the terrorist cell to make it seem as if they're quite organized and that they're prevalent throughout the region. So there are deliberate attacks on convoys that have been done. So these security concerns are a priority that are being dealt with. The second one is financial and material resource constraints. In order to address the needs based on the breadth of the needs, there is a need for the international community, for partners to mobilize effectively financial and material resource constraints mentioned earlier and fill the gap. Capacity constraints also exist. But then finally and more importantly, misinformation and disinformation about the Tigray region is also heavily prevalent. And that is one of the key challenges in terms of being able to show the world, but also to effectively respond to what is going on the ground. So there's distortions of data, conflicting data, manufactured stories and atrocities are some of the phenomena that we see with regards to misinformation and disinformation about the Tigray region. Having stated these challenges, we should not make these challenges that are a phenomena unique only to Ethiopia. Rather, the call to action is a concerted and honest, really honest effort to rebuild the lives and livelihoods of the people of Tigray, our people of Tigray. There is no official of this administration that does not want the what the international community wants for the people of Tigray. The people in the region are our people, our brothers, our sisters, and our daily concern, not only a Twitter concern. Just to say a little bit in terms of what I had intimated earlier with regards to misinformation, disinformation in the media space, as it pertains to the situation in Tigray, there is a proliferation of misinformation and disinformation, as I stated, that we have been witnessing being perpetuated by the criminal enterprises supporters abroad. So fabricated narratives and data are then reshared by credible institutions without the foresight and examination of authenticity of claims and allegations. And I can give you quite a list of that, but just to give you a snapshot of what these are. For example, a recent utilization of an image from a destruction in the Yemeni war, which was used by a credible institution, Human Rights Watch, a director from them, claiming that it's happening in the Tigray region. This is a disinformation and false information. Second, claims of use of chemical weapons by TPLF chief disinformants abroad, which found its way into an international publication without any due measures taken for veracity of the claims. Thirdly, images of TPLF's crimes during the 2016 Irrecha massacre being used to fundraise online for an organization claiming to support the people of Tigray. Very recently, an audio that had been doctored, stitching words and sentences to portray the Prime Minister saying things that he did not say. This itself making it to international media news by reputable international organizations without the foresight to actually determine if this is credible audio evidence or not. On previous occasions, we might not have stated it publicly, but the Ethiopian government has for a while raised concerns and flagged that some media entities have been infiltrated by TPLF operatives and working to skew information about the country through reputable media outlets. Just last week, we witnessed as a nation one senior journalist who had left his post at BBC and joined a terrorist cell in Tigray, which has been outlawed. So these are some clear concerns that we have within the country in terms of accurate portrayal of what is happening and facts on the ground, really making it out to the world. So this is particularly important because such materials are being pushed by TPLF sympathizers that the global community and international media are calling upon to provide context and analysis on the situation on the ground. So there's peddling of misinformation and disinformation, but then these are also the people who are being called to provide accounts of what is happening within the country and within the region. However, context doesn't come easy sitting thousands of miles disconnected from what's happening on the ground and behind screens while fabricating at one's fingertips is easy. There are also allegations of the media space regressing within Ethiopia, which are unfounded. Indeed, Ethiopia has never experienced a more media-friendly and enabling environment than the past 3 years. I don't think much needs to be said in terms of the number of local media that have flourished over the past 3 years. And now with the new law, which recognizes online media as well, claims of stifled media spaces are unfounded. And the Attorney General would also intimate a little bit about the media proclamation that does support freedom of expression and freedom of press within the country. So just to go to the second point, and this is related to the elections. So Ethiopia's 6th national elections are scheduled to take place on June 21, 2021. This is the highly anticipated elections, and it will be arguably the first, the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia's attempt at free and fair elections. Current data or information received indicates that around 40 million citizens have registered to vote, and this is by far more than previous voter registration accounts. So following the failure of the previous regime to build a democratic culture, Ethiopia is now confronted with two twin challenges of building the necessary institutions and mindsets to enable a robust democratic culture and practice. Ethiopians are also presented with an opportunity to transition the country into a new era of governance and prosperity, befitting its long history and aspirations of its proud people, and the ample growth potential our country possesses, which we have been able to uncover over the past 3 years. To this end, the federal government's commitment to hold the first free and fair peaceful elections have been founded on ongoing preparations to meet this goal. We have stated it previously, but just to reiterate, a National Election Security Committee comprising members of the Federal Police, the Attorney General, the National Intelligence and Security Service, and the Ministry of Defense and regional representatives has been established by the government to ensure a peaceful and legitimate election is undertaken. Discussions have been underway on the role the government must play in ensuring that citizens exercise their constitutional rights to vote freely without any duress or harm. Special measures are also being taken by the committee to identify areas where there is a risk for conflict. To deal with any election-related grievances, the Federal Supreme Court has set up dedicated electoral dispute adjudication benches. As you've witnessed, political parties are aggressively campaigning across the country, and to help voters make informed choices, election debates among contesting parties have been ongoing over the past weeks with active participation of independent media and civil society on topics of national importance. The Prime Minister has also continued convening regional presidents and the head of the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia with the objective of identifying and resolving bottlenecks or challenges in the pre-election phase. And I think this is a clear testament to the will at the highest level to ensure that Ethiopia experiences its first free, fair and democratic elections, because I don't think any other sitting head of state has done this kind of follow-up thoroughly. So in closing my end of the briefing, as a nascent democracy that is rebuilding and reorienting institutions towards a democratic path, that is working on strengthening political, economic, and social stability, setting the foundations for multidimensional prosperity of its people, Ethiopia working closely with its partners and neighbors is a stabilizing force for the region. The government's principle of Meddamer remains an anchoring point in all of its endeavors. And as Ethiopia addresses the challenges of terrorism, the government welcomes the constructive support of partners and its citizens throughout the world. The clear call for action being made is for the diaspora community particularly to unite. Your country and your people need you beyond lines of divisions. Wasting resources and energy digitally fighting one another does not serve the people of Tigray who need that support. It does not serve the women and girls. It does not serve the men and boys who need the support. So channeling efforts for their revival should be a priority and part of the concerted effort. The other call is for Friends of Ethiopia to stand with Ethiopia, and for partners to really rethink some of the ill-informed decisions that have been made. So with this, I will give the floor to the Attorney General, Dr. Gedion Timothewos, for his part of the briefing. Thank you.
Thank you. My briefing would focus on criminal investigation and prosecutions relating to what has transpired in the Tigray regional state over the past few months. Particularly, the briefing would focus on one, investigation and prosecution of the crimes for which senior and veteran leaders and affiliates of the TPLF are suspected of committing, crimes for which the organization has been duly designated as a terrorist organization. Second, my briefing would focus on investigations and prosecutions of allegations of sexual assault and the killing of civilians in the Tigray regional state. Now, coming to the first focus of my briefing. The first phase or the first round of investigation into the acts of the TPLF leadership has ascertained the following facts. One, the TPLF leadership, through a decision of its executive committee or Politburo, has established what it called the Tigray Military Command. Two, this illegal military outfit was organized, staffed, and commanded by retired generals who have retired from the Ethiopian National Defense Force. Three, this illegal force had 8 divisions and 1 mechanized unit and 23 regiments and its own logistic structure and command apparatus. Fourth, the leadership of the TPLF, which is now a designated terrorist organization, played an active role in organizing, arming, and financing this armed force. 5. The TPLF had armed, financed, and supported different armored cells in various parts of the country, including in Afar, Amhara, Oromia, and Benishangul Gumuz regional states. The TPLF had used these entities as agents in its effort to destabilize the country and undermine the federal government. 6. On November 4, 2020, the military force that was organized by the TPLF attacked several bases and facilities of the Northern Command. These were coordinated attacks that were meant to wipe out and neutralize the Northern Command. In addition to the attacks on the Ethiopian National Defense Force, there were also attacks against federal police units in Mekelle, Shire, and Aksum airports and other federal facilities in the region. 7. There were also attacks among others on the Shagoda windmill, the Mekelle and Adigrat petroleum depots, the Tekeze Dam and electric plant, the Alamata electric substation. 8. The facilities and network of Ethio Telecom were disrupted under the direct order of the chairperson of the TPLF at that time. So these are the key findings of the first phase of the investigation that has now been completed. Several suspects who have been implicated in these crimes have also been apprehended. To preserve some of the key evidences and testimonies gathered in the investigation, federal prosecutors are currently in the process of having such evidence recorded by the Federal First Instance Court. Once we have finalized the process of entering these evidences and testimonies into the record of the Federal First Instance Court, the appropriate charge will be pressed at the Federal High Court. The above set of facts, which have been ascertained through our investigation, constitute serious crimes. Several suspects who have believed to have had a direct and major role in the commission of these crimes will now face charges including, but not limited to, outrage against the constitutional order, armed uprising and instigating civil war, impairment of the defensive power of the state, and the crime of terrorism. The investigation into the crimes perpetrated by the TPLF over the years will continue in subsequent phases of our investigation. The other focus of our investigation and prosecution relates to the killing of civilians in cases of sexual assault or rape. Investigation into these allegations are being carried out by 4 different entities. The first line of investigation, the first line of inquiry is being followed by the military court and prosecutors, that is the military justice system. Second, you have the regional police and prosecutor, that is the regional justice system. And third, you have the federal police and investigators. And finally, while these 4 entities focus on criminal investigation and prosecutions, as you very well know, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission are also conducting their own joint investigation, parallel to the criminal investigations I have mentioned earlier. I will now briefly highlight some of the findings and milestones of these processes of investigation and prosecution. As far as the military, police, and prosecutors are concerned, they have focused their efforts particularly on a case of killing of civilians and case of rape and sexual assault perpetrated by members of the Ethiopian National Defense Force. At this point, I would like to note that the Ethiopian National Defense Force had issued clear and written rules of engagement in the form of a pocket book to be carried out by all its personnel. However, unfortunately, there have been some bad apples who have violated these rules of engagement. Now, whenever there have been such instances of violation, military prosecutors and the military police have conducted their own investigation, and so far they have pressed charge against 28 soldiers who have been suspected of killing civilians in situations where there are no military necessity. The trials of these suspects are underway, and the verdicts are expected to be handed down shortly. Furthermore, the military prosecutors have also pressed charge against 25 soldiers who have been suspected of committing acts of sexual violence and rape. The trials of these suspects are also underway. So far, there have been 4 convictions, and there are also several other investigations that are underway. And as soon as charges are pressed against these suspects, we'll be sure to give you an update. Now, in addition to the military justice system, the regional authorities, the regional law enforcement agencies, including the regional police and the Regional Justice Bureau, have also received and are investigating complaints and allegations, several complaints and allegations of sexual assault and rape that have been reported to them in various parts of the regional state. At the moment, we are trying to coordinate with the regional authorities and to ensure that wherever there are overlapping jurisdictions, matters will be handled in an expedient manner. Now, coming to the federal investigations, the federal police and federal prosecutors have focused on allegations of major atrocities or killing of civilians in mass that have been reported since the onset of the conflict in the Tigray regional state. Our focus so far have been particularly on 2 localities. The first report of major crimes and atrocities to emerge in the Tigray regional state concerned the killing of several hundreds of civilians in the town and around the town of Maikadra. A team of federal police investigators and prosecutors were deployed to the area, and after an extensive investigation in which testimony of more than 250 witnesses have been taken, and also after exhuming remains and conducting forensic investigations using a medical team of forensic experts, the investigation team has ascertained that more than 200 individuals have been killed and several victims have sustained severe and serious injuries. The investigation team has identified around 200 individuals who are believed to have taken part in the commission of these crimes. While most of the suspects are believed to have fled to Sudan, around 23 suspects have been apprehended and charges have been pressed against the suspects at the Federal High Court, and their trial is already underway. Report of major crimes and atrocities concerned incidents in the city of Aksum. A federal investigation team composed of the federal police and federal prosecutors is currently investigating these incidents that have primarily taken place between the 19th and the 28th of November. This is still an ongoing investigation which we are trying to finalize, and these are our major findings so far. Regarding days of civilians and damage to civilian installations, infrastructure, and property caused by artillery fire, we have gathered evidences that seem to indicate that some civilians have died, and there have also been damage to civilian installation and infrastructure in situations that might not have been warranted by military necessity. Furthermore, we have also tried to, apart from artillery fire, we have also tried to investigate into allegations of killing of civilians, particularly from November 27 to November 28. In this investigation that is still underway, we have received testimony from around 120 witnesses. We have also gathered medical records and other pertinent evidences concerning those who have been injured and who have received medical treatment. We have also obtained some video and photographic evidences concerning the damage to civilians and civilian properties and installations. The testimony we have received so far seems to indicate that close to 100 civilians have been killed during these dates. The investigation shows that a significant number of more than half of these civilians seemed to have been killed in the city while they were outdoors, and there are indications that some of these individuals, a large number of these individuals, might have been irregular combatants who have received a 2-day crash military training and who have been armed by the TPLF. While there have been these individuals who have been killed perhaps in situations that appear to be combat situations, there have also been close to 40 civilians who seem to have been killed in situations where there were no active fighting and where they did not pose a threat to the troops in the area. So as soon as we finalize this ongoing investigation, we'll be able to determine what charges need to be brought against whom. But the investigation so far indicates that some of the allegations, some of the reports regarding the killing of civilians were credible. Before I conclude, I would like to reiterate the fact that we'll continue these efforts to investigate and ensure accountability by coordinating the efforts of the military, federal, and regional justice systems. We'll also expand our investigations to cover any other credible allegations of or reports of killing of civilians or any such crime. Finally, I would also like to reiterate the fact that the federal government is committed to ensure accountability for all violations of pertinent local and international legal norms and standards. We believe that our efforts so far demonstrate our commitment to ensure accountability and preclude impunity. We condemn all acts that put the life and dignity of civilians in danger, and will continue to strive to bring to justice those responsible for heinous crimes against civilians. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gedion. So now we'll open it up for questions, any inquiries that you have.
Billene, what is the position of the government regarding calls by countries like the US and the UK for a ceasefire and unimpeded access in Tigray region? Dr. Gedion, you talked about individuals convicted of or charged with rape and other forms of sexual violence. There are some media reports that say that it has continued and there has been a spike in the past 2 months. What is the figure you have with regard to the number of victims of sexual violence, including rape? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noé Oshobodin for the French radio. 2 questions. One, maybe an update about the process of withdrawal from Eritrean troops. Is it started? Is it underway? Second question about the proof, the information about humanitarian workers helping, like smuggling weapons. Will the government share the information with media? Thank you.
Thank you. My question relates to Dr. Gedion. You've told us about the investigation regarding alleged crimes committed by federal troops and also by TPLF affiliated forces. Many victims have alleged that Eritrean forces as well as Amhara militias have also committed killings and rapes. Have you started, or are you undertaking investigation regarding to crimes allegedly committed by Eritrean forces and also militias from neighboring Amhara region?
Thank you. Goes to Dr. Gedion. You've mentioned 28 military personnel are under investigation for human rights breach. And does this include the Eritrean forces? And my second question goes to Billene. You stated about a number of NGOs are engaged in smuggling weapons to the insurgents. Do we know who are financing them at this point? Thank you.
አመሰግናለሁ ከፎርቹን ጋዜጣ My first question is, you have said that there are credible evidence indicating civilians have been killed in Aksum between November 27 and 28. Were Eritrean involved? Like, is there any evidence indicating that Eritrean have been involved? And my second question is there any assessment or investigation that's underway to find out casualties and economic loss caused by the war? Thank you.
Okay, so I will respond briefly to the questions that were directed to me, starting with the first one with regards to continued calls for unhindered access for humanitarian assistance. I think I covered it fully in the first part, which is to explain that unhindered humanitarian access has been granted already some months back. There are also number of humanitarian actors that have entered and that are working alongside the government in terms of providing humanitarian assistance. Where there are challenges and security concerns, as stated earlier, for access to those areas, this is contained because of security challenges. But the military has made itself available, or the National Defense Forces have made themselves available to escort. So some requests that are coming are not to have any military escorts as well, but there are security concerns that the National Defense Forces, as the critical entity that is stabilizing the area or undertaking the rule of law operations, have identified. So within their mandate, they need to also be able to caution where unhindered access needs to be backed by support from the National Defense Forces. So this continuous call for unhindered humanitarian access doesn't really paint a picture of a wide section or wide areas within the Tigray region that are already opened up and are available for humanitarian actors to go and perform their obligations and responsibilities. But as I had mentioned earlier and related to the other questions that have been raised, there are instances where checkpoints have been put. So if it's to bypass those checkpoints, which is an indication of operating within a no man's land, and Ethiopia operates within laws, within frameworks, and within processes, particularly in a state of emergency area, to apprehend terrorist cells where there are terrorists or groups that have been identified as a terrorist organization actively, even impeding or being obstacles to the development of the people within the region as well. There are claims, for example, that farmers within the region are being obstructed to continue with their farming activities. These accusations are lodged against the National Defense Forces, but that is not the case. What we're witnessing is this is something that is being perpetrated by fractions of these criminal elements because they want to politicize the issue. They want it to get into global attention and global airwaves to put undue pressure on Ethiopia. Why would the National Defense Forces, or why would the Northern Command that has been stationed within the Tigray region for almost 3 decades, protecting these people, working with them during national disasters, helping out during farming season, be an obstacle for food assistance or be an obstacle for enabling them to sustain their livelihood? So these are unfounded allegations. But going back to your questions, unhindered access has been allowed. And in fact, the platform that we had earlier this morning really created a good understanding and created an ongoing, the potential for ongoing dialogue to determine where are the obstructions that they are facing, perhaps bureaucratically. But the Ethiopian government holds the position that unhindered access has been allowed. The second question that had been indicated with regards to the withdrawal of Eritrean forces, a request for the exit has already been put in place by the relevant authority, and per the Ministry of Defense reports, withdrawal has commenced. So we need to let that process play out according to the agreements with these stakeholders. There's 2 questions that are more or less the same, and they refer to what I had intimated earlier with regards to the need for military checkpoints and ensuring that convoys that are entering these active areas of operation are checked, and whether the information will be made available to international media and who they are and whatsoever. Again, as I had mentioned at the beginning, this information will be provided in due time by the relevant authorities, but I am also trying to give you a perspective of why the National Defense Forces have also instituted some checkpoints in some areas as well, because our mission is to serve the people of Tigray. Our mission is to bring stability to the region, to ensure that humanitarian assistance reaches the people of Tigray who are suffering at the cost of belligerence by a terrorist group. So they should not be the ones who are paying the costs of these challenges. And the continued feeding in of these kind of perhaps weapons or so on is working against the interests of the Tigrayan people within the region. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first question was about figures, and there are several figures as far as the regional authorities are concerned. The reports they have seem to indicate that there have been several hundreds of victims of sexual assault and violence. And as far as the cases that have been handled by the military justice system are concerned, there are also some figures indicating that around close to 30 soldiers who have been involved in this kind of activities. So we're trying to collate that data from different sources and come up with a clearer picture that shows the whole picture. In relation to this, I think it's also important both for the media and other entities, to note the fact that prior to leaving Mekelle, the TPLF had released close to 10,000 hardened criminals and convicts. So there are many convicted criminals, hardened criminals that are at large who might be engaged in all sorts of heinous crimes. Now, the other questions, most of the questions relate to whether or not Eritrean troops have been implicated in some of these acts. According to our investigation, in some of these instances, Eritrean troops have been implicated. So that's the answer I have. Most of the other questions related to, in one way or the other, related to this matter. So that addresses it. In relation to this, one other fact I would like to bring to your attention was the fact that on these dates, or at the end of November, the chairperson of the TPLF had issued a statement claiming that the TPLF had regained control of Aksum. There have, on this date and prior to this day, there have also been several calls by the leadership of the TPLF for the civilian population to take up arms and engage in fighting. So some of these incidents happened in this context. Thank you very much. As far as the economic damage of this conflict is concerned, I don't have a reliable figure at this point in time.
We can take a second round of questions, if any. Okay, if there are none, then I would just, there's a follow-up question.
There are media reports that suggest that the sexual violence is still going on, and they even go as far as saying that there has been a spike in the past 2 months. What's your assessment of the situation on the ground with regard to this issue? Thank you.
I would rather only speak about the cases that have been investigated either by federal prosecutors or regional authorities, regional prosecutors and police, or the military justice system. As far as the trend and general figure are concerned, I mean, we know, for example, that prior to these incidents, back in 2019, even going back to 2019, we know the kind of complaints there were. There were even demonstrations complaining about massive cases of sexual assault. So it would be very difficult to provide a trend analysis. So I would say that these are the figures that we have, and to the extent that these kind of incidents are still occurring, we'll be sure to investigate them and bring those who are responsible to justice. I would also like to point out that there have been efforts to beef up the regional law enforcement apparatus. More than 4,000 police have been deployed after receiving refresher courses. There have been efforts to apprehend the convicts that have been released by the TPLF to improve the overall situation. So we hope that these kind of measures would bring a decline in the trend. I would also point out that in many instances we have seen that in the cases that we have actually investigated, there have been sometimes deliberate, sometimes it could be unintentional exaggerations and campaigns of disinformation. So I would take some of those reports with a pinch of salt.
Okay, thank you very much. My question goes to Dr. Gedion, and it is about the status of the state of emergency enacted in Tigray. I'm asking this because the 6 months period has already ended in May, and we don't know, or there is a confusion about its status now. So can you tell us a bit on this?
Do the Ethiopian government have the room to allow independent investigators to engage in this investigation process? Thank you.
Let me start with the last question. Is there room for independent investigators? Of course there is, and that has already been accomplished by allowing the UN Human Rights Commission and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission to conduct a joint investigation. The investigators of these two entities have already been deployed to the region and they are conducting their investigation. So this is not a hypothetical answer. This is something that is already going on. As far as the state of emergency is concerned, the state of emergency was decreed for a period of 6 months. Those 6 months have elapsed. So I think the fate of the state of emergency should be obvious for everyone. But the federal intervention is still, the federal intervention mandated by the House of Federation is still in force.
Okay, we thank Dr. Gedion. And just to wrap up, wanting to reiterate again that the government of Ethiopia remains committed and is working as a priority on humanitarian assistance and support for rebuilding the Tigray region. The call again for international partners, for humanitarian actors, is to work constructively with this open engagement from the side of Ethiopia in serving the immediate needs of our people within the region. There is no government official that is sleeping around this issue. We might not communicate it adequately, but there are various efforts and endeavors that are in the pipeline, and this needs to also be paid attention to alongside the demands and the calls that are being made. Ethiopia has a long history of diplomacy and has worked with all of its partners, and its bilateral relations, particularly within the past 3 years, has been centered on strengthening these relations as well. And we would like to continue strengthening these relations on the track of constructive engagement. And particularly when we're addressing issues within the Tigray region, a particular focus again is to help us or work with us together in terms of combating disinformation and misinformation, because a lot of things have to be evidence-based and fact-based, not lobbyist information-based or disinformation-based. So with that, the call again is to support in the endeavors begun by the government of Ethiopia and strengthen what has already been started. Thank you very much.